Okay, well, thank you all for joining in our session this morning. We're really excited to have you to join for Policy Funding Sustainable Development, oh my, to learn about what the City of Long Beach is doing from a finance and sustainability and equity perspective. So today with us we have, oops, running into troubleshooting issues already. Sorry. There we go. We have Jennifer Lee in planning with development services, who will speak to our CAP and the development of that plan. We also have April Walker in public works. She's a project management officer, and she's the one that's really overseeing a lot of the very interesting sustainability capital projects to actually push the CAP through and implement actual projects in our community. We also have Nancy Villaseñor, who was actually just recently promoted. Very happy for her. She's in Parks, Recs, and Marine, and is now a bureau manager. Congratulations, Nancy. So Nancy, she's kind of a Jill of all trades, and she'll be speaking specifically to the Racial Equity and Reconciliation Plan today, which we're very proud to have as a city. I kind of speak as though I work for the city. I don't work for the city at all. I love Long Beach. And then myself, I'll be kind of wearing two hats today. So for the past 4 years, I was a sustainability director for Studio 111 and RDC. They're two firms in one, an architecture firm in Long Beach. But recently I have made a change to go back to my previous firm as the ESG director for some reasons that you'll see are quite evident as my passions as we move through this. So thank you all for being here, and we're really excited to tell you what's going on with the City of Long Beach. Some of the objectives for your credentials. We're going to outline the resiliency and equity concerns specific to Long Beach. We'll speak to the completed and pipeline projects, as I mentioned, with April's help as a result of the CAP. We'll also speak to the funding sources and partner programs that are driving these initiatives forward and financing them. And then we'll also illustrate what we can expect to see from the public sector, public and private sector as a result of these initiatives. So a little bit of data, if you can open up the chat function first so we can get a sense of who's in the audience, although I kind of have a good sense of who's here. But just so we're all on the same page, if you can open up that chat function, just type in the answer to your first question. My first question: are you representing public entities, private, NGOs, or all of the above? Let's see how this works. All right. It's working. Great. Thank you for sharing. And then tell me what industry you're representing. Are you representing owners, a city, tenants specifically? Are you in the AEC, on an AEC team, product reps, manufacturers, consultants? Tell us about what you do. This is the shout out to represent yourself. Great, a lot of owners. Okay. And then money flow. Tell me where you think what your understanding is what's driving the financing for your projects. Is it public funding? Is it private funding? Is it, I guess it's really those two, but if there are specific initiatives that are driving your projects, if you can drop that in there, that would be great. Okay, nobody knows where the money's coming from. That's fine, because we're going to talk about it. In terms of CAP, has anybody participated in a CAP, which is Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, or a Sustainability Action Plan workshop in the past? Participated in a few here in Long Beach. Yes, Fern. Yes, I know you have. All right, thank you, Alex. Good to see you. Thank you, Ismar. Good to see you here as well. I like the not yet. Yes, you're holding yourselves accountable. Good, very good. All right, and then moving into the next question, what is your biggest obstacle, I guess, in terms of moving your own sustainability agenda forward? Is it money? Is it time? Is it resources, expertise? It's so difficult in the field of sustainability. We want to be experts in everything, and that's just not possible. Or is it access to other tools and resources? All of the above. Yes, April, I agree with you. Money, yes. Thanks, Lynn. Upfront definition of energy and sustainability goals. Yes, 100%, Greg, thank you. Resources, Max Kiefer, thanks. Time, I agree with you. All right, and then moving on to the last question in terms of equity, would you say that your current policies within your company or those companies that you're representing, do they have an equity lens? Maybe if you were to rate it a little bit, más o menos, or if this is something that your company is really taking seriously. Kind of quiet. This is definitely, yeah, starting to. I love what Nancy's doing. I'm so glad she's here. I'll say for RDC and Studio, we definitely started a READY initiative, Racial Equity and Diversity Initiative. That's still going. I keep hearing about it. We're actually doing a food bank volunteer event tomorrow up in Commerce. So I'm excited to see some old friends and colleagues. All right, well, thank you for that input. That was very, very helpful. We appreciate your participation. Now let's start to jump into the policies. Now, this is a graphic we put together that represents some of the key policies that we've seen in legislation that have been passed over the past 15 years now. And these little icons that you see on the screen here, obviously the gray circles represent greenhouse gas emission and climate change specific policies. Obviously, the ones with the red houses represent equity and housing policies, which we're starting to see become more frequent as in the last few years. And then anything with the trees, obviously, is pertaining to open space and parks. So let me just move this a little bit. So we're going to speak quite a bit to AB 32 and SB 32 as we make our way through the beginning of this session. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer to speak to the CAP with Long Beach. And Jennifer, I don't know if you're speaking, but I think you're muted.
There we go. Okay, great. Thank you. It was not allowing me to unmute. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Lee, and I'm a planner in development services with the City of Long Beach. I'm the lead on the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. So for those who are not familiar, here's a bit of an overview. The Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, or the CAP, is a roadmap for meeting the state's GHG emissions mandates and also helps the city adapt to the impacts of climate change. It was informed by technical studies, including a climate stressors review and a vulnerability assessment, and is a pretty far-reaching plan. So it should touch all city departments, operations, and influence funding decisions. There's often some interest in where climate action planning work is housed within the organization. In Long Beach, development of the CAP was led by planning, but it will be implemented by many departments with oversight by the city manager's office. Next slide. So the CAP is a plan for Long Beach to meet SB 32, a state requirement that emissions are reduced to 40% below 1990 GHG levels by 2030. Long Beach has also established an aspirational goal of net carbon neutrality by 2045, which is consistent with the state's executive order. The CAP helps Long Beach comply with the variety of additional laws, which you can see down here, and also helps the city meet its policy commitments. Beyond meeting a statewide GHG emissions target, local climate action plans help implement mitigation measures locally, help the city adapt to climate change, and also advance equity. A primary reason why development of the CAP is being led by the Planning Bureau, which is in the Department of Development Services, is because it's a mitigation measure of the general plan land use element to help ensure that emissions from future development are minimized. The city has committed to adoption of a CAP within 3 years of LUE adoption and subsequent monitoring of GHG emissions. The role of development services in the CAP implementation phase will be to update plans, policies, and codes for consistency with the CAP, monitor GHG emissions towards the reduction target, and also streamline CEQA analysis for future development projects. These next set of maps show the climate risk and how it's distributed through the city. So on the upper left is Cal Enviro screen, where red shows areas with greater cumulative pollution levels. And you can go 2.2 miles and be in the 99th percentile of Cal Enviro screen percentiles, and then go 2.2 miles and be in the 10 to 15 percentile of Cal Enviro screen. The map on the top middle shows vulnerability to extreme heat, which are almost the exact same areas already impacted by cumulative pollution, consisting largely of Central, West, and North Long Beach. In the top right map, we layer on social vulnerability to climate change, which was determined using factors such as race, income, and others, and get again practically the same areas highlighted in red. The bottom left map shows areas with higher proportions of white residents, which is just about an inverse of the top 3 maps. And in the bottom right map, the darker the red, the higher proportion of children under the age of 10. So the majority of young people are living in the highest environmental and climate at-risk communities. The next slide shows that the climate impacts that impact Long Beach. So extreme heat, poor air quality, drought, flooding, and sea level rise. And on the right are news clips about the power outage that downtown Long Beach experienced in summer 2015, which left residents and businesses without power for 3 days and caused traffic and other kinds of disruption. Additionally, these are photos from flooding events that occurred in 2017. So this is to show that climate change is already impacting Long Beach and is anticipated to become more frequent and intense. The CAP is divided into mitigation and adaptation. So on the mitigation side, actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions is organized into buildings, transportation, and waste. And on the adaptation side, this addresses all of the climate impacts that will affect Long Beach and are affecting Long Beach. The plan includes an equity strategy for each action, which helps make sure that we're considering the most vulnerable communities when implementing each action. So this is an example from an extreme heat action to expand urban forest cover and vegetation, where the equity strategy is to prioritize the enhancement and expansion of urban forest cover in neighborhoods most impacted by extreme heat and poor air quality, because we've seen that poor neighborhoods tend to be hotter and have less access to green space. The city recently adopted a racial equity and reconciliation framework, which Nancy will speak to shortly, but I just wanted to highlight that there are specific goals that speak to advancing environmental and climate justice. And one of the action items is to identify sustainable funding sources to implement the CAP. The CAP provides a quantified pathway of actions that will be implemented and monitored to reach the 2030 GHG emissions reduction goal. The Long Beach target allows the city to exceed state GHG reduction requirements, or otherwise allows some breathing room to adjust if emissions reductions in a particular sector are not on track to being met. And as you can see on the graph, purple is business as usual, and the blue line, the dotted line, goes down to 2045, 0, which represents carbon neutrality. So we have a lot of work to do. And the climate mitigation process is going to be iterative. As CAP actions are implemented, GHG reductions and other performance metrics will be monitored, and that'll inform adjustments to the city's strategy for achieving its GHG target. And finally, here's just some early stage implementation and funding actions. So we're looking to integrate the CAP into the annual budget and capital improvement plan. We've been working on the CAP for about 5 years within the planning process, and we're just moving into implementation now. There was a soft confirmation by City Council earlier in January, but we're undergoing environmental review now and looking to adopt the plan later in the year. We're looking to cost out CAP actions. We're using the CAP framework to apply for extreme heat and coastal adaptation, grant opportunities, and being on the lookout for others. And we're seeking to drive investments informed by CAP equity strategies, which is exciting to see that start to happen. Just to touch on some of these projects, we have an urban heat toolkit through a SCAG grant that we're implementing in an area of the city that's in the high heat and high social vulnerability areas, which will develop a toolkit for that we can then use to align funding sources to make some of those built environment changes happen. We're looking at building electrification, education and incentives, looking to put together a working group later in the fall to that will consist of city and private sector partners to look at how we might provide education and help incentivize building electrification. And we're also working with some students now on a CAP and green jobs study. And finally, I'll just highlight that we're a part of Lead for Cities. I think I saw Kristen Payne from the Office of Sustainability in the meeting, and we're working closely with them to align Lead for Cities and CAP metrics.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was great. We're excited to see all the hard work that you've put in for the planning. And with that, let's hand it off to April. Capital projects. April, we can't hear you yet.
Yep, I just got unmuted. Thank you so much. Okay,
thanks.
My name is April Walker with Public Works of the City of Long Beach. And as our CAP team and development services starts to gear up toward final adoption later this year of the CAP, the city realized that we needed to have a dedicated energy efficiency infrastructure program that really worked hand in hand with the CAP team to ensure that the projects that we put out into the city are aligned. And so today I'm going to talk about 4 specific areas within our capital projects program, energy efficiency infrastructure. And those are entitlements, mobility, renewables, and energy efficiency. And so here's a few pictures that kind of highlight what those projects look like. So one of the items that we're working on right now is a Colorado Lagoon open channel. And so this is a huge phase 2 of the Colorado Lagoon project that creates an open channel between Colorado Lagoon and Alamitos Bay to restore full tidal circulation to the lagoon, provides connectivity for wildlife from Alamitos Bay to Colorado Lagoon, and improves quality of lagoon for plants and animals. And so our projected budget at this time, and we say at this time because we know that things are always changing in capital improvements, is $26.3 million. And the main source of funds for this are our Tuglands funds and a Port of Long Beach investment. Mobility, we're really excited to have kicked off a 5-year plan to install 500 ports citywide that will support both our fleet infrastructure as well as our public charging units. And so our 5-year plan is 500 ports. We're about 2.5 years in and we're about 241 live ports. So it's very exciting. We also have a ZEV transition underway. So we've implemented the light duty vehicles. So any light duty city vehicle that has passed its useful life is replaced with a ZEV. And now we are starting to plan for mid-duty and heavy-duty ZEV to meet car regulation timelines. We've also recently received a grant to develop a blueprint for mid-duty and heavy-duty ZEV infrastructure through the CEC. So we're really excited to go through the grant acceptance process and kick that off, which will comprise of a large group of stakeholders. Kristen is probably going to be on that group, probably Fern, Jennifer Lee. So it's really going to be all hands on deck effort to ensure that the blueprint aligns with all city goals. And the main funding sources for this are cap and trade funds through AB 32, internal department charges, and grant funding. But I also want to note that our EV charging network would not have would not be as successful as it is today without the partnership of SCE's Charge Ready program. And so SCE provides the infrastructure necessary so that the city then pays for the charger installation. They also have a Charge Ready transport program for MD and HD ZEVs, which we were looking to leverage as we transition those as well. And we have a list of future locations for the next push as part of their Charge Ready round 2. So renewable energy is also very new to the city. We have currently kicked off our citywide solar program, where we have a power purchase agreement to install 10 solar canopies citywide at various locations. And these include parking structures. We have one going up at PD East, our Fleet Yard, and our Energy Resources campus. Currently, we have 4 in progress, and the other 6 are in permitting. We are currently also exploring the opportunity to install city-owned solar at public-facing facilities. And the reason why we're looking for that to be city-owned is that it doesn't always make sense for private investors to come in and install renewable programs in smaller buildings, but it is very important for us to be able to achieve those renewable sources for our cap goals and operational cost savings. We also have a power purchase agreement for battery storage at 2 locations, which include the Convention Center and Public Safety Building. And again, the funding sources for these are cap and trade funds and private investment. And so to round this out, we have energy efficiency. So energy efficiency has been ongoing. We were really able to utilize Measure A funds to start looking at retrofits within public facilities. And so those include cool roofs, windows, LED, and HVAC systems. Facilities that we've included today are park community centers, health buildings, library branches. Nancy was one of our first PMs delivering those retrofits to our library branches. So she's got a lot of experience with that. We've also recently completed a citywide street light LED conversions, where we converted all street lights to LED. We achieved an estimated $500,000 of annual cost savings and 1,088 metric ton CO2 equivalent reductions. And here we have our funding sources as cap and trade funds, SCE rebates and incentives, which is part of the streetlight conversion program, Measure A, and general CIP.
Thank you, April. That was incredibly informative. And now we'll hand that off to Nancy to speak to racial equity. Nancy, are you able to get unmuted for us? We don't hear you yet, but we will be patient.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me?
We can. Yep. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. I'm Nancy Villaseñor, and I am one of the department equity champions for the city of Long Beach. I have a lot of information to share, and we're just going to scratch the surface, but don't worry, we're going to drop some links to resources in the chat later so that if you're interested in any of these topics, you can learn more about them. The city has an Office of Equity that has been working on equity initiatives for several years now, but George Floyd's murder elevated the urgency of this work at our agency as it did throughout much of the country. Our city council had an earnest discussion about race soon after his murder, and 2 weeks later adopted a framework for reconciliation and also declared racism a public health emergency. The framework required the city to acknowledge racism, listen to the community, convene stakeholders that would help shape policy, and also catalyze change with actionable items. After months of listening sessions, town halls, roundtable discussions, community stakeholders were convened to make policy recommendations on how we were to move forward. As a result of that effort, we have a document called the Racial Equity and Reconciliation Initiative Initial Report, which was adopted last August. And it has 4 specific goals and actionable strategies for each goal. And Jennifer mentioned the one about climate change, so that and the CAP. So that was one of the goals from the plan. So the first goal is ending racism in local government through internal transformation, which means looking at our inward at our practices and policies to determine if we are contributing to racism or working to eliminate it. The second was investing in community safety and violence prevention. The third goal is redesigning police approach to community safety. And the fourth is improving health and wellness by removing social and economic disparities in communities that are impacted by racism. Our city is a member of the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, or GARE, which is a network of government working to achieve racial equity. A lot of our efforts are modeled after GARE. For example, we have equity champions like myself that are trained and tasked with conducting racial equity 101 trainings in each department as recommended in the initial report. We will also be developing racial equity plans in each department based on results-based accountability. So again, we'll drop some resources for that. One of the reasons we are conducting Equity 101 trainings is to provide a baseline understanding of racism and the, next slide please, of racism and the role that government has historically played in perpetuating systemic racism. These are things that we normally discuss at work. We normally do not discuss at work, and it is a new challenge for us. We, in our trainings, discuss the difference between equality and equity because it's not enough to provide equal resources to the community while at the same time failing to address their specific needs. So equality works if everyone starts from the same place and has the same conditions, but we know that's not the case. Equity, on the other hand, means everyone has the ability to succeed regardless of their background. As shown in this graphic, providing everyone the same bike may be equal, but won't work for people that are tall, children, people with disabilities, etc. Similarly, a one-size-fits-all approach in government is a disservice to the diverse communities that we serve. Next slide. There are different elements in society that intersect to maintain systemic racism. Land use and lack of quality housing can place you in the path of environmental justice, just as access to education and jobs can affect where you live. Access to transportation and infrastructure can affect the livability of a community, as healthy food and green space can affect your health. The fact that we're talking about this topic at this conference is a great example of how to start conversations across different sectors to address equity in all the work we do. Next slide. One way we do that is to apply an equity lens when we are planning, making decisions, and implementing policies. GARE has an equity toolkit, and the city has established its own based on the GARE model. The basics of a toolkit involve applying questions that seem simple yet are so important and often are overlooked. For example, who is being burdened and who is benefiting from a decision? What does the data tell us and what data is missing? How is the community being engaged? Who is making the decisions and what, from what angle? How will the implementation advance equity? Are there any unintended consequences from this action? How will we hold ourselves accountable to the community, and how are we communicating with the community? When asking these questions as part of the equity process, it's important to ask them from the perspective of race, gender, language, ability, and neighborhood characteristics, among other things. Next slide.
My turn to unmute. Thank you so much, Nancy, for all of your work. I love hearing about the initiatives that the City of Long Beach is taking on to address racial equity in such a diverse community. And I also dropped a link in the chat because of some of the questions that I had asked earlier. The group seemed kind of quiet on the diversity side and racial equity side of my questions. And so I wanted to point out that USGBCLA does have a DEI committee. So if you're a small company or even a big company and you just want to get engaged in these conversations, you don't have to recreate the wheel. You can join in with other groups to learn what they're doing, because it's all about rising tides. So with that, I'm going to move us on to private development. As I mentioned, I had the good fortune to oversee sustainability at Studio 111 for the past 4 years as their director, right here in downtown Long Beach, where sustainability is paramount to the firm and is one of the firm's core beliefs. As such, we created a sustainability toolkit for design calling all projects in. And this slide, I realize, is probably a little bit difficult to see, but here's just 2 of my favorite sections of that particular toolkit. And it's actually a 40-page document. It's probably way too much information, but it's really intended to be a reference guide for the design teams. But honestly, the most important 2 pages are the first 2 pages. And it's just a list of bullet points like this that are built around the AIA COAT top 10 principles with best practices to think about for every project. Now I want to highlight one of my favorite projects with Studio, which I'm actually still working on. It's Laserfish. This is a 100,000 gross square foot ground up office that is owner occupied. So how often do we actually get to build owner occupied and developed projects? This is located in the lovely neighborhood of Bixby Knolls, just 4 miles north of downtown and the beach. It's walking distance from the Blue Line, and soon will be connected to the city's famous bike system. Early on in our process, we really took the time to get to know the staff, who they are, what they care about, where they want the company to go. And one of my favorite clubs, I was clearly very excited to see this, is that they have an SCR, a social corporate responsibility club that actually in the past few years has changed from a club into 2 full-time dedicated positions at the firm. And I meet with these 2 women every 2 weeks to speak to social responsibility and sustainability, to make sure that as we hand this building off, which they should be moving in the next few months, that they can speak to these initiatives. And I really have to applaud the social side that Laserfish has taken on from a very, very early stage. It's really, truly embedded in the company. It's very impressive. So it's fun to work with them on that. Included in our survey to staff, we asked them what they wanted to see. And as it turns out, the most popular request was a gym. But as much as we'd love to design an Equinox or a Soul Cycle in an office, that just wasn't making it into the programming. But fortunately, they had plenty of game rooms, a variety of outdoor spaces, loads of natural daylight, and of course, dedicated wellness rooms. And one of the things that actually Laserfish brought to the table, I won't take credit for this, is that they actually wanted to have dedicated parking for new and expecting mothers right up front, which I thought that should just be a standard. That should just be an all-around best practices standard. So there's all these little things that make a really, really big difference in both equity and sustainability of programming for a space. Here's a quick image of what the building will look like from the 405. Now, fortunately, ownership had already committed to pursuing LEED and WELL as a means of communicating their values to staff and the community before we had even had an opportunity to survey the staff. We went in speaking to environmental and social responsibility in our interview for the process, and they bought right into it. It's just a part of their culture. So I'm feeling very fortunate to have a client that is so progressive. Which brings me to standards and certifications. Now, most of us know the highlighted standards indicated in this slide, but how many others do you know? A lot of these others are probably fairly new to this group. And those that I'm specifically speaking to are GRI, GRES, Most of us should probably know the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Off to the right of that is the science-based targets, TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. That's a pretty interesting one. And PRI, which is the UN's Principles for Responsible Investing. And that's a 6-principle standard that has been developed by investors for investors, which again brings me to the ESG side of things, because we are seeing, I mean, you know, in the past few years, I've seen a dramatic shift in the term, or shift from the term green and sustainable to carbon neutrality. And I'm sure a lot of you have been seeing that as well. I actually used to have an Excel sheet of all the companies that would publicly announce their carbon neutrality, but then you get to a point where you just can't keep up anymore. And that was definitely over the past 18 months, especially this past Earth Day, which is really exciting. I couldn't keep up with all the announcements anymore. So that was excited to see all of those commitments. Which brings me to more of the financial side. So why is this happening? It's because of risk. So think about your company or your client's company, and now ask yourself, which of these items that you see on this slide pose the greatest risk to your or their abilities to grow and sustain their business? This is what the business community is seeing. And who cares about risk? The C-suite, banks, insurance providers, and anyone looking at the bottom line. So those are the investors. Now that events like extreme weather, infectious diseases, and biodiversity loss are becoming the top concerns, investors have finally taken notice. So let's talk a little bit about the carrot and the stick, although I'm really going to speak more to the carrot. I think we've been on that side today. I'm going to do my best to move through these next couple of slides in the next few minutes so we can get a couple of questions in there. So as I said, I've moved back over to my previous firm, Leading Edge, to oversee our ESG initiatives, which is environmental, social, and governance. So this is a concept. ESG is not a standard. It's not a certification. There's not a governing body. It's an idea. So ESG is kind of like saying, what's your sustainability strategy? But it's more inclusive of that. Let's see, sorry. As I'm trying to move forward, I'm losing myself a little bit. So rather than saying I want to have a sustainable building, we're saying that we want to have an ESG strategy throughout an entire business, a portfolio, or a fund. So yes, we're actually decarbonizing funds now. How cool is that? Those investors that I was talking about early on really caught on. And then we also have all of the millennials who are finally making the big bucks, I'm using air quotes here, and buying homes. And a lot of us are choosing to invest responsibly because we want more than a retirement account. We want a thriving future. And investors are seeing this trend. So in essence, decarbonizing funds translates to increased access to capital, reduces risk for businesses, and uplifts the brand and recognition of a company. So it's really a win-win-win. Now, the E in ESG represents a variety of voluntary commitments, which you can see listed here. Again, I want to save a little time for questions. So the social represents commitments, diversity, engaging stakeholders, both within the company and externally, philanthropy, and health and wellness. And lastly, with the G, I can't help myself but think of Dirty Dancing. Nobody puts baby in a corner. And so nobody puts the sustainability or ESG lead in a corner. I know that's super geeky. These people should really be empowered. They should be among the C-suite and senior leadership. They should gather input from key internal and external stakeholders. And most importantly, they should be enabled to actually hold senior leadership and management accountable for meeting their ESG goals. So think bonuses that are tied to ESG commitments. Sorry, I'm not switching the slides over here. Lastly, I wanted to show the growth of funding. So on the left, we see the number of investors grow just at a rapid pace over the past 10 years. And when I say investors, I don't mean a venture capitalist. I mean a JP Morgan, I mean a Goldman Sachs and BlackRock. And on the left, on the right, we have the assets under management. So that's representing close to $30 trillion in capital. So that just brings me back to, by companies practicing sustainable and ESG focused practices, they are able to gain access to that capital, whether they are public or private. It's all about the money and then some. So in closing, I'd like to reflect on the past decade. Yes, we've been attending NGBCE for 10 years now, or at least I have. And I remember those early days. They were hard and they had a lot of pretty somber panels. I remember back then. And now look where we are, seeing the fruits of our public sector's labor with AB and SB 32. We finally got the private sector on board and moving at a rapid pace, if I may say. And new leadership in the White House is truly prioritizing sustainability and equity, as we've been seeing publicly and with our keynote address this morning. It's a really good time to be here. And even though my panel and I can't necessarily see you, we're excited to share this space with you. And we thank you for your dedication for creating a thriving future. So with that, I want to open it up to questions. And I have a couple of links here, which I'm going to drop in the chat, which are in addition to the links that my co-panelists have been dropping in there. So I believe that you can also download this entire chat, or you can copy them if you want to dive into it like we have. But yeah, with that, I'll stop sharing and open it up to questions. My husband's off to the side clapping. All right, so I know that Ismar and Jennifer, you had been going back and forth in the chat a little bit about elevating the energy performance and kind of green building codes with the city of Long Beach. Jennifer, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we do have a CAP action to incentivize electrification of residential and commercial buildings. We did an exercise where we quantified the impact of REACH code. That is something that we're exploring right now. We're starting with an education and incentive-based approach. So we just started chatting with AIA Long Beach. And we have currently one permitted electric building in Long Beach, which is a commercial building by City Ventures. And then the second will be the first residential building that's currently being permitted now. So we're exploring ways to provide education and design incentives, and we'll likely be putting together some kind of working group in the fall. So for people who work on building electrification, it would be great to be in contact with you to discuss more.
Great, and very happy to announce that Laserfish is a fully all-electric building. We'll be doing tours soon. All right. Julie, do you know if we were able to unmute everyone? I think maybe they still have the option to unmute themselves, but feel free to jump in and ask questions. Hey, Ismar, how you doing?
Good. Seems like you can now. I tried it a couple of minutes, but now everybody can unmute themselves. So just want to share that.
So Sarah, I have a question. This is Kate.
Hey, Kate.
Hey there. One of the things we were discussing in the decarb thinking session was the fact that enforcement, we sometimes give incentives and permits to projects that may fall short in their reality. And while I realize that this is kind of a long-term question, I wonder if we don't need to start elevating decarbonization of both operational and embodied carbon to a level of health risk that's equivalent to what restaurants have to go through. So they don't get certified once and then we trust you that forever it will be clean and healthy to dine in your establishment, but rather whether it's biannual or annual, they have to be reviewed and recertified to make sure that they are actually operating with the carbon efficiency. And so long-term, as you move towards REACH codes, I hope you will also explore, and that's to the folks from Long Beach, the question of enforcement, because building permits are not enough. So thinking about ways to enforce this and kind of concerns about following through and actually seeing that things got built the way they were permitted would be the first step. And the second step would be coming back 2 years later to see that they're operating the way they promised. Does that sound like something that is doable in the future?
I can speak a little bit to that. On the just regulation and enforcement question, right now we're starting with just an education and incentive-based approach. We recognize that regulation and enforcement would, potentially help, just support electrification. There are, Long Beach has a very old existing building stock, and we want to be conscious of building costs, which is why we're starting with an education and incentive-based approach. But that's something that we're definitely considering as a potential route for the future.
Yeah, if I can also add, I definitely agree this was more of a public sector question. But I'd like to kind of point out a great example with the city of New York. I'm going to drop a link into the chat for this. Governor Cuomo announces $13 million of award-winning projects in the second round of Buildings of Excellence competition. So from my understanding, I think it was really built around Energy Star and very much focused on operations, not on new construction. So those high-performing buildings were incentivized, and they're getting money through probably the Department of Energy. So check out that link. That might be an interesting kind of partnership for the city, and maybe even public or private sector as well. Thanks, Kate. That was a great comment, as always. All right, any other questions? Did that good of a job, huh? All right, well, thank you everyone for joining our webinar. This was great. We had 46 participants. Can't wait to see you in person soon, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.
Thank you. Congratulations on the new job, all new job, Sarah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Nancy too. Bye.
Everyone.
Bye, everybody.